So you're a crocheter and you want to learn to knit. There are lots of videos that teach you how to knit, but since I have been knitting and crocheting both since I was pretty young, I wanted to try to explain what I think would be the easiest way to explain knitting to someone who already knows how to crochet. So when you crochet, you start with a slip knot. You have your hook, you tighten up your slip knot, and then usually you tension the yarn with your left hand. I use this wrap method, but there are a lot of other methods. And then you pinch the yarn right below your hook, and then you use your right hand to manipulate the yarn, and you can make these chain stitches. Now, if you look at a chain stitch, it's just a loop pulled through another loop. So here's a loop, I'm pulling another loop through, another loop through, another loop through. And if you look at the back of the chain stitch, it's got these bumps. The front of the chain stitch has these V's, and the circumference of the chain stitch is determined by the circumference of my crochet hook. So all well and good. And then when you crochet, usually it's not very stretchy material. You have about as much give as your chain. So how much ever give is in a chain, that's usually about how stretchy your end piece ends up being. Now, if you were trying to crochet, but instead of a hook, you had a little pointy needle, you could technically do it, but you're going to run into some problems because obviously that yarn is just going to slide off. But with a little bit of maneuvering, I can use, instead of a hook, I can use this sharp pointy thing, stick. I can use a sharp pointy stick to bring a loop through a loop, and it works, right? It doesn't work as well, but it works. And the reason why it doesn't work as well is because there's nothing on the other side to stop this yarn from just sliding off like that. So people who knit were like, okay, well, what if we had a second needle that could at least stop the yarn from sliding off, and now we have two sticks we're working with. So that's why when you are knitting, you have two needles. You can use more than two needles, but we'll get into that maybe later in the more advanced class, I guess. So the first row, when you're knitting, the first row is called a cast on row, and it's just the process of getting a bunch of live loops onto your knitting needle. And there are a number of different ways you can cast on your first row. The most popular cast on method is the long-tailed method, but there are a ton of different ways, and people are inventing new cast on methods all the time, and they name them after themselves. So I really like, I think there's one called Jenny's Surprisingly Stretchy Cast On, and also she has a corresponding bind off that's used for things that need a lot of elasticity, like socks or maybe like sweater necks. It works really well. But you can actually do a crochet cast on. Now, the problem with a crochet cast on is that since crochet is a little bit less stretchy than knitting, you have to be careful because you could end with your very first cast on row. Think about this, like if you're crocheting, if your chain stitch row is like tensioned really tightly and then you have loose tensioning in the rest of your work, it's going to kind of bubble out, right? So same thing could happen here. So you want to be careful about that. What I usually do if I'm going to do a crochet cast on is I either use a larger size hook than I need, or I actually chain 2 stitches in crochet for every 1 stitch that I'm picking up in knit. So I'm actually going to just crochet a foundation chain. It's something I don't know, I'm not counting, so I'm just gonna do a bunch. The reason why I use crochet cast on a lot is because it's really easy to unravel. And there are cases. It's usually they call it a provisional cast on. So if I was doing crochet, I would work my hook into either the front of the chain stitch like this, or sometimes if I want to have a nice clean edge, I would work into the back bump, right? And I would pick up a stitch, or I would start my stitch like this. And then you can think about this like Tunisian crochet, if you were going to the next one and you were picking up, right? So yeah, I have these live loops. So you can kind of think about picking up stitches in knitting the same way. So I'm going to just put my hook through. I'm going to go into the back bump. Now the difference is in crocheting, I normally do a yarn over this way, but if you do a yarn over, you'll end up with a twisted stitch in knit. So I'm actually going to be doing a yarn under. I'm going to be doing a yarn under. And that is because when you knit and you're looking, you've pulled a loop through a loop, you want the right leg of the loop to be in the front, and you want the left leg to be in the back. So this is a properly oriented knit stitch. You don't want it to be twisted. So I'm going to be doing a yarn under, and I know I said I was going to do every other chain just so that I have a little bit more elasticity. So let me, you know what? Crocheting while watching a camera is actually, or well, I guess I'm knitting, but whatever. Crafting while watching a camera is actually not that easy. Okay, so I'm going in. I'm doing, nope, that's split. I'm going in, I'm doing a yarn under, and then I'm coming back out. And this is actually a crochet cast on. So if you're a crocheter, you'll find this, and you have any experience at all with Tunisian crochet, you'll find this pretty easy. And you know what? I kind of actually need to look at my hands and not the camera, so I might end up off camera a little bit. Sorry, guys. Okay. And maybe one more. Okay. All right, so that was a little awkward, but so I actually did, so they call this process picking up knit stitches. I picked up one stitch for every other chain. So I have a pretty stretchy foundation row, and now we are ready to knit. So if this was crochet, I would tension my yarn in my left hand. I would hold the work here, and I would be, going like this. But as I said earlier, you have this problem where the yarn just slides off the end of your needle. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to rotate this needle, and I'm going to hold it in my left hand, and then I'm going to take that's not my other needle. What did I do with my other needle? I found it. Okay, so where was I? Yes. Tension the yarn, and then you're going to hold this needle. Now this method of knitting where you're holding the yarn in your left hand is called knitting Continental style. A lot of videos will show the yarn, holding your yarn in your right hand, and that's like the English style. That's actually how I learned to knit, but then since I also crochet, I'm actually ambidextrous when it comes to knitting. So I have here my needle, my first cast on row. I have my yarn tensioned the same way I would tension if it was crochet. And so I'm going to do basically a knit stitch is like doing a chain stitch. I'm going in. So what I do is I make contact with my right needle. I make contact in between the first two, and then I slide that needle around. And that's why it's important to have your stitches oriented correctly, because if that right leg of the loop is in the front and the left leg is in the back, when I slide around, you'll see I'm actually going through the loop. And then I'm going to kind of hook the yarn around like this. just the way I would do with a crochet hook. And then I'm going to pull that loop through. So this is basically a chain stitch, right? Where you're putting a loop through a loop. But I'm using 2 sticks to do it instead of a single hook. So again, I'm making contact. I'm going through. I am pulling this yarn through. And so what I'm doing is, and you'll find your own like comfortable motion, but I'm just using the 2 needles to pull this yarn through. So I'm doing, I'll do this again, pull it through, pull it, oh, I'm splitting the yarn here, pull it through. So I'm essentially kind of doing almost like the first step of Tunisian crochet, where you go through and you just make a bunch of chain stitches all the way across. That's essentially what I'm doing. But instead of now working back in the other direction, I'm just going to turn my work and then do it again. So I'm kind of zigzagging back and forth. So I'm going through, hooking the yarn and pulling it through. And usually what I do is, so this is why I can't crochet by feel. I have to be looking at my work to crochet because I have to be able to see where I'm putting my hook. But when I'm knitting, I can feel, you know, for this first stitch with my fingers. Oop, I dropped my tension. I can feel for it. I can feel that my needles are making contact. When I slide it around, I can feel that it's going through. When I hook my yarn, I can feel it's going back. And what I usually do is I try to make sure that the tip of my right needle is just tracing the barrel of my left needle back and forth in this kind of back and forth motion. So I make contact, I trace the barrel of my needle, and then I can usually, especially if they're metal needles, like these are metal, when I draw this back, I don't know if you can hear it, there's kind of like a clicking sound that it makes. And then once I know my yarn is trapped, I can just draw, sorry, my camera's getting out of focus. I can just draw the tip of that needle back on that barrel. So this whole motion, I'm not really ever losing contact. These 2 needles are touching this entire time up until the point where I have to take the loop off so I can move to the next loop. So I'm going in, I'm tracing it back, and then I'm pushing it off. I like knitting this way because you're not letting go of your needles in between each stitch. You're just sort of sliding the work up and down your needles, but you're holding onto your needles in both hands pretty securely. So let me do it again, although this video is getting a bit long. Maybe 13 minutes. Okay, so I'm going in, hooking around, sliding back, sliding off. Going in, hooking around, sliding back, sliding off. Going in, hooking around, sliding back, sliding off. And you can see that the front, right, looks just like a chain. You got a V and a V. So in, around, and then you can kind of start to pick up speed once you get this motion comfortably. Obviously, tensioning will be challenging in the beginning. Don't worry about that. So, all right, so this is, I did, let's see, 1, 2, 3, maybe 3 or 4 rows. I don't know, I lost track. But I wanted to show you, see how every stitch is connected to the one below it. See, this is like a chain stitch coming out. I'm calling it a chain stitch. When you're knitting, they call it a knit stitch. But you can see that this is like a loop coming through a loop here. So it's connected at the bottom. And then because it just goes straight into the next loop, it's connected to either side. And then because you've got this loop above it, it's connected on top. And because it's connected in all 4 directions, you end up with something that's a lot more elastic, both horizontally and vertically. It's elastic in all 4 directions. It's elastic on the diagonal. I mean, it's just very stretchy material. So it's great for wearable fabric. And this little tiny bit that I did where I'm knitting, I'm turning, I'm knitting, I'm turning, I'm knitting, I'm turning, I'm knitting. So I'm knitting on the front and I'm knitting on the back. This is called the garter stitch. I'm going to pause this video and then pick back up in a new video because I'm already at almost 16 minutes.